Game of Thrones has come to an end, but that hasn't stopped HBO from making a brand new prequel series. Based on past information, we knew that HBO wrote multiple different series, and they picked the best one that they're currently shooting the pilot for. And the series that they picked is said to focus on the Long Night, the first time the White Walkers came south, and the children and the First Men had to fight to push them back. But recently we got a lot more information about this prequel series. First of all, this show isn't expected to be called Game of Thrones or The Long Night. Leaks have shown that this show is going to be called Bloodmoon. We see the logo that holds the current Game of Thrones font. The two circles are made to be like suns that mirror each other and are separated by a spear, maybe potentially a dragonglass arrowhead. And while in Game of Thrones lore there isn't much information on the Bloodmoon, I think it could be in direct relation to the Long Night. We know Game of Thrones is covered in lore, whether it's Azor Ahai or the Prince that was promised. The Bloodmoon could be another prophecy that's been lost over time, since this show takes place 8 to 10,000 years before the show of Game of Thrones. And that time focuses on the Age of Heroes. And while it does focus on the White Walkers coming south and the first Long Night, it also focuses in on a lot of key characters that we've heard of in the Game of Thrones series. First of all is Bran the Builder. He's been known to build the wall to keep the White Walkers from coming south again. And then from there, he eventually became the King in the North. George R. R. Martin also spilled details on the Starks in this show and how they're actually going to be present. And another key focus we could see with the Starks is the direwolves. George R. R. Martin says that since there are no dragons, we could be seeing direwolves as well as mammoths, which we've seen both in the previous series, but I think that this brand new series is going to have a bit higher of a budget than the first couple seasons of Game of Thrones, and they're going to rely heavily on giants, mammoths, direwolves, and other mythical creatures to try and combat dragons being missing from the show. Also, House Lannister's origin takes place during the Age of Heroes. Casterly Rock has its name because it was founded by House Casterly, who were tricked out of Casterly Rock by Lan the Clever. It's only fairy tale on how he tricked the Casterlys to leave their home, but he did it, and in so, House Lannister was born. And we know House Lannister could be a potential focus, since in this leak, we see a lion sigil. And we got further confirmation from George R. R. Martin. He said this show Bloodmoon predates the rise of the Lannister family, and Casterly Rock is still held by the Casterlys. So with George R. R. Martin's confirmation, it seems like Lan the Clever is going to take over Casterly Rock. And another thing that we will see with this show is a different Westeros. There isn't the 7 kingdoms, and like George R. R. Martin said, at a time there were 12 kingdoms. But in this show, we're going to be focusing on the 7 kingdoms being completely separated. That Westeros is made up of multiple very small kingdoms. And I'm sure all those small kingdoms are going to have multiple different families that we've never heard of, as well as origins of new families that we see grow and develop in the actual show of Game of Thrones. But my key issue with this show is its focal point on the White Walkers, much like the focus seemed to be on the White Walkers in the last 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. We've come to find out after all that prophecy of the prince that was promised, Azor Ahai, and all the learning of Dragonglass, that the Night King and the White Walkers were never really a threat. He was defeated in his first true fight south of the Wall. And I think Season 8 handled the Night King so poorly, it's going to be hard for them to make a compelling character out of the Night King and the White Walker threat in this current season. How can the prequel effectively show us that the White Walkers are a threat if we saw them easily get defeated in one battle? That's why I think in some aspects this prequel might retcon and re-innovate some aspects of the story. We may see more reliance on prophecy to explain why the White Walkers actually went north again. Because if they're truly going to hold to the continuity of this last show of Game of Thrones, then the Night King and the White Walkers go north in the first Long Night because they were genuinely defeated from the Children of the Forest and the First Men. And I'm not sure that that makes quite a compelling story. But we'll see what they're doing with it in the coming months. And that goes to the release of this show. There could be 2 potential possibilities. Right now, they're currently shooting Bloodmoon, and it began filming in May. Since HBO has been working on these spin-offs for a while and it's been in development, and since they now have the confidence and the capital to invest in the franchise of Game of Thrones, I think they'd want to release this as soon as possible. And on average, we see about a 10-month film cycle with the Game of Thrones series. And I think this will be no different. If the pilot's been approved by HBO, then we could expect to see this show around April to June of 2020. That's just a year. But the latest we could get this show is if it takes them a little longer to adjust the pilot, much like it did the first season of Game of Thrones. It took them 2 years to successfully get a pilot together. Then we could expect this show in April 2021. But I know HBO is still going to keep that April to June summer slot for Game of Thrones. But that's it for me. Please let me know what you think about the Game of Thrones prequel. When do you think it's going to come out, and how do you think the show is going to go? And are you even excited for this prequel after the last season of Game of Thrones? Please let me know down below, and take care. See you guys later.